So I'm talking to Mr. Abdul Ghani Lone. You were saying that you were about 11 at the time of partition. You were in your home village in Kupwara district.
Yes.
And in January 1948, raiders or mujahideen, whatever you wanted to call them, came across from the Pakistan side and took over that village. What was the attitude of local people in the village to these people?
Local people very much were receptive to them. Local people were very much joyful, and they welcomed them. People came out of their houses and welcomed them.
The raiders who came into Baramulla earlier, I've spoken to people in Baramulla. They said they did a lot of damage. They were basically after looting.
Well, so far as those people who came from Baramulla, I don't know about them, but it is said that they were the tribesmen. But the people who came from our side, they were not tribesmen. They were the citizens of the state. They were state subjects.
They were Kashmiris?
They were from the state of Jammu and Kashmir. We call them state subjects. You know, people who live, who do not speak Kashmiri, we call them state subjects. Though they don't speak Kashmiri, but they are citizens of state of Jammu and Kashmir. Say people living in Azad Kashmir, or say people living in Jammu or Ladakh, they don't speak Kashmiri language, but we call them state subjects.
So these people crossed with a political motive in January 48?
Yes, they crossed with the motive of liberation.
And that was something that local people welcomed?
Yes, that is because they knew that they are our people from our state, and they are fighting the occupation forces. By then, people had got a lot of hatred for Indian forces. They were thinking them to be the forces of occupation. So they welcomed the forces which were consisting of state subjects of the state of Jammu and Kashmir. That's why they were overjoyous and they welcomed them. They provided them food, shelter, and all that.
And how long did these state subjects control your village?
They controlled not only my village, but they controlled the entire district of Kupwara, which is now, previously it was a part of district Baramulla. Now present district Kupwara entirely was under their control for about 6 months. In the month of June, they had to retreat.
The Indian Army came?
Yes, Indian Army came in very good numbers.
Do you remember any fighting at that time?
I remember I was a small boy, but when a contingent of Mujahideen had to retreat, and they were going from a village, and people, say more particularly the women folk, they were crying, they were weeping that Indian Army is going to take us over. And then there was the Indian aeroplanes came and they dropped a bomb in an adjacent village to that of mine. My village is known as Dardharai Khargund, and the bomb was dropped in the next village, that is Kralpora. And also there was some firing also, strafing by the Indian Army police onto my village and another adjacent village that is known as Lone. Fortunately, there was no damage, but the bomb damaged about a dozen of houses in Kralpora.
village about Maharaja Hari Singh?
Well, at that time, whatever little I remember, people at that time were out and out for Pakistan. And they were saying at that time that Maharaja has ran away. He has left for Jammu. And people were very much opposing him because he had joined the state with India.
And there was nobody wanted India?
Nobody wanted India.
But did people have a view that the Maharaja was a good man himself who was misguided, or were they completely against him?
I don't suppose. At that time, there was a movement launched by Sheikh Abdullah at National Conference. They were against the hereditary rule of Maharaja, and the Muslims of Kashmir were a suppressed lot, and education was barred to them, and forced labor was being taken from them, and none of their kith and kin were in the services. They were not in the army, they were not in the civil services, and people were not liking the rule of Maharaja. I can't say whether their feeling at that time was genuine or it was because of the agitational role of National Conference, because people were liking at that time Sheikh Abdullah, they were supporting him. Whether the hatred or dislike for Maharaja was because of Sheikh Abdullah's agitation or it was a real one, I was a young boy in those days, I can't differentiate. But that much I remember.
Was your village a national conference village or a Muslim conference village?
It was not that to that extent very much clear. People were not, divided into national conferences or Muslim conferences. But since Sheikh Abdullah was under detention in those days, before 47 and 46 he was, I suppose, in detention. So people had sympathy for him.
When did you first see Sheikh Abdullah?
I saw first Sheikh Abdullah in 48. In the 48, I should say, in the month of June or July, I must have seen him. When Indian army advanced and they crossed the Nastachun Pass and reached Tangrar, Karna Valley, then Sheikh Abdullah toured those northern areas. And I was a young boy, and I was one of the students who was playing the band, and I remember that Sheikh Abdullah came that way.
Did you hear him speak?
Yes, he made a small speech there.
In Urdu, in Kashmiri?
In Kashmiri.
What sort of impression did he make on you?
At that time he was speaking against the Mujahideen. I was confused at that time that why should he speak against them.
And do you think that was the view of many people in the village?
Most of the people, rather all of them.
They supported the Mujahideen, they supported Sheikh Abdullah, and they couldn't understand why Abdullah was criticizing the Mujahideen.
Yes, they, in the heart of their hearts, they were not liking Sheikh Abdullah's criticizing the Mujahideen. But since he had led them, at this time, I can analyze it, but at that time, people had no hatred for Mujahideen.
Do you think if Kashmir had become part of Pakistan in 47, that this area would have been at peace for the last half century?
Yes, definitely. There would have been no problem at all. Basically, what impression I have got, at that time people, at least from that area, from the northern areas, that was the only road link. I was not knowing that there is another link from this Banehal via Jammu to the plains. This was the idea. Only people were going on foot. They would go for purposes of labor. I remember Landi Kotal and Ibatabad. All these names I remember from that day. Kalabag, because people would go as laborers and they would send their letters, and sometimes people were, a lot of them, they were illiterate. They would request me to read the letter, and whatever I could read for them, I was reading them out the letters and all that. So that was the only road link, and people would very much like to accede to Pakistan.
All their economic links were on that side?
Everything. This Jammu or beyond Jammu, this was unknown to people.
Do you think Kashmir is still suffering from the legacy of 1947?
Oh yes, definitely. It is suffering because of the wrong judgment of Maharaja and Sheikh Abdullah and the Indian leaders. Basically, partition, there should have been no partition at all. But when partition was a fact of life, then people should have thought very properly, and the accession should not have been forced to the people, to the unwilling people. The majority of Muslims, it was an absolute majority, say 84% Muslims were living in this state, and it is surrounded by all sides by the Pakistan territory. It should have been allowed. It is greed on the part of Indian leadership. They should have allowed for the good future of the whole subcontinent. Both the countries would have been living like good neighbors, and there would have been a very good economic bloc in this South Asian region, say the SAARC countries and all that. They could compete on the basis of economic prosperity with other regions of the world. And this would have been a very good power bloc in the world politics.
But Kashmir stops that.
It is at Kashmir stops that. It is the basic greed of the Indian leadership and that of Sheikh Abdullah and Maharaja. There was the Maharaja's erstwhile Prime Minister Ramchandra Kaak. He was very much against the accession of Jammu and Kashmir to India. Unfortunately, his memoirs have not been published. They are somewhere with a publisher in London. I don't know what is the reason why those are not being published, and it would come to light. People at that time were short-sighted, particularly Mr. Jawaharlal Nehru. I suppose in the later part of his life, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru had realized the folly of forcing a accession, and that is why he managed the release of Sheikh Abdullah, and then he sent him to Pakistan. But
so Kashmir is still paying for the mistakes.
It's paying, and God knows how far it will be paying. It will have to. You know what things are being taken place here. According to our perception estimate, about more than 60,000 people have been butchered by the Indian armed forces, and our daughters and sisters have been raped. The rapes do continue, and the killings, custodial deaths. You know, the other day, 4 senior commanders of the Hizbul Mujahideen were killed in custody. Well, if they would have been killed while fighting, and then the Indian armed forces, they have been deployed for a job, and nobody could say that they are on the job, but they arrested them. And even the Chief Secretary of the state, while replying to a question from BBC, he said yes, they were arrested and they must have tried to run away and they have been killed. But that is not the story of the police. They said on a specific information, we reached there and we asked them to surrender. They started firing on us, and then there was a encounter and they were killed. That is not a fact. I saw with my own eyes 2 of them. Their limbs were broken, their backs were burnt. I mean to say, we are suffering for all this Indian expansionism. God alone knows how far we are going to suffer it. And it is because of that foxpaws on the part of Indian leadership and Sheikh Abdullah and Maharaja. It suited their personal ambitions. They did not care the future of a people and future of their own country. You know how government of India is suffering. About 45 crores of rupees Indian government is to spend per day in Kashmir, and they are making these sacrifices. One is at last to understand for what. In order to suppress an unwilling people, the more they spend their money, the more they deploy their armed forces, the more there is alienation. Alienation is going deeper and deeper. Hatred is being generated by the deployment of armed forces and using the armed forces. This is the only type of armed forces concentration ever world has seen. About 700,000 armed forces for a small population of 4.5 million people. It is because of that wrong setup of the partition.
Independence was the option that Hari Singh is said to have favoured. Independence is the option which some constituents of the Hurriyat still favour. Is it an option?
It was an option and it is an option. But how can one help the expansion tendencies of the parties? Leaders without support whatsoever, support at the grassroots level, are becoming the governmental leaders. The men like Narasimha Rao and this H.D. Devi-Gowda. They are the men who cannot even solve the smaller, very, very insignificant issues, not to speak of a complicated issue like Kashmir. So, independence is an option. That could have been a very good proposition, because none of the warring countries, so the both countries, would have not to face, say, a very disgraceful situation, because Indians could say that at least if Kashmir is not with us, it has not gone to Pakistan. Same the Pakistanis would say that, well, India wanted to retain it if it has not gone to us, but it is not with India also. And the people of the state could have very friendly relations with both the countries. But how can we help? We are a small people, very insignificant people. It's a big power, rather number 3rd in the world so far as military strength is concerned, and they have deployed all their armed might against a small and unarmed people.
So Kashmir is still under the shadow of partition?
Yes, it continues to be under the shadow of partition. And then, I cannot say, but well, that is history. The planning, future planning of a intelligent or a cunning government like yours, I mean, say the British government at that time, who did send a lawyer from that place who was the commissioner for partition, and he was influenced by Pandit Nehru via Mountbatten, and he allotted this Gurdaspur district to Indians, which made it possible for them to force Maharaja to accede to India. That is also unfortunate.
So here, partition is not history. In a sense, partition is not history, it's still being lived, the consequence.
Yes, that is correct.
Even after half a century?
Yes. For all these 50 years, it has been eating our nerves. The people of the state have never seen a peaceful period. We have been under the shadows of wars, irritations, enmities, diatribes and all that.
But you yourself have been inside the state government, you've been outside.
I have been inside the government, I have been outside the government, I have spent a lot of time in prison. I was a 9th class student when I was arrested in the year 1949. And then again in 1953, when Sheikh Abdullah was deposed and arrested. Then again when I became MLA in the year 1968, I was again arrested. Then during the period of Sheikh Abdullah, when he again came to power, I was arrested twice. During the period of Ghulam Muhammad Shah, when I was arrested. Then during the period of the governorship of Jagmohan, I was again arrested in the year 1986. Then I was arrested in the year 1990 and detained for 2 years. Then again in the year 1993 I was detained for 1 year more. It was when this Hazrat Bal Shrine was besieged.
I was there when you were arrested.
Yeah, you were here, and you know how they arrested me. But one thing you don't know, when they took me inside the this BSF battalion, what they made of me, God alone knows. They ruthlessly beat me. I was half dead. So things, who knows what is going to happen. Then these worst type of bomb blasts. The renegades came to my house and they attempted on my life. They took away a gun which was my licensed rifle. They took that away on 24th of October 1995. Then there were consecutively 3 hand grenade blasts. Lot of damage was caused to my residential house, and those, all the 3 were thrown towards my bedroom. And lastly, this RDX car bomb blast, it did not only destroy the household, but it had shaken the whole family. We had a narrow escape. So who knows what is in store for me and for my people here in Kashmir. Because Government of India is seems to be very much adamant, and it is a state policy to suppress a small people like Kashmiris. And suppression is being directly or indirectly supported by the people who day in and day out are crying for freedom, for human rights safeguards and all that. Say your people from West, particularly Britishers, the Americans, nobody comes to our rescue. Nobody will fight for us, but at least people should condemn violence which are being perpetrated on a people, small people. Government of India needs to be told that why it should continue persecution of a people. Why shouldn't they go in for a peaceful dialogue? The Hurriyat Conference has been demanding day in and day out that we are ready for a peaceful dialogue between the concerned parties. Nobody is paying heed to that. And we are suffering. These are the after effects of the wrong decisions of the partition, follow-up actions of the partition, expansionist tendencies of the leadership of Government of India. It's very much there.